Hello, we are Human Hollow.
And we are going behind the tracks of our debut EP, Static.
Yeah.
So the first song on the EP is Another Nightmare. And this one started with An Against the Clock. And I remember thinking we should start a song with a bass riff and clapping. I was like listening to a track earlier that day at my work and I heard clapping and I was like, oh, clapping is so much cooler. We should totally do a song with clapping.
Yeah,
So when it came up with that riff and the clapping, you can watch our Against the Clock on YouTube as well. And you can totally see us build this track. But I remember in my head, let's start with clapping and a riff on the bass. And I remember you dove right in really quickly with lyrics and a melody. And it was just like, we were off to the races really fast with this one.
Yeah, and by that time I think it was later on the night, so we had been kind of jamming together, well, in our format that we like to do. So it was feeling like more comfortable, all the juices were flowing a little more. And a lot of times, like this was one of the tracks where I feel like it was very in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
I guess for me, like writing like lyrics and vocals, a lot of times or most of the times is very dependent on like the music and the mood that is happening. So this one seemed to come pretty easily, but also just, with a little more sass than maybe some of the others that we had.
Yeah, I don't
doing.
think we'd ever really done one that had, this one kind of had like a weird like joy to it. Like something about, I think like the clapping and then the rhythm of it was just different than all of the other things. And so like the vibe was just immediate. And I feel like we were pretty locked in. I love going back and watching the Against the Clock and just kind of like just seeing us build from scratch. And for me, like I don't look at the stuff I'm doing. I'm always looking and like seeing how fast you create these full worlds with your lyrics. And like I respond really, really like, I guess I respond best to other melodies and things that are going on. For me, I have a more difficult time coming up with concepts and lyrics on the fly. I can come up with maybe small, very basic melodies, but I can respond to like, given melodies so much easier. So what you'll see with us, and especially in this song, like I always can do these sort of counter melody things, and it's always best when you've created this sort of space to begin with.
Yeah, and it's interesting because sometimes I have a hard time. I just get like, very blocked, but then other times it
Flows right out.
happens and it's going. But then if I, get to a certain point where I'm like trying to take apart the song later on and like write
To like flesh it out. Yeah, like what we'll
then
often
sometimes
do.
like feeling that and like tends to be like the harder part when it's maybe less in the moment. But I also like the fact that if there's any parts I kind of get stuck for a second, then you already like, you come in and we've had whatever the basic beat and synth or bass line is going, and then whatever melody I'm working on. And then if we're both feeling it, like you automatically have some kind of like vocal response as well, which helps me bounce off that even more.
Sometimes we're both really locked in, and I think it's really, really fun when we both are like feeling that like groove go. And like I think like you really crafted this sort of, not, I guess, story, this whole concept really fast. Like I came up with that riff and then the claps, and then immediately I was like, oh, here's a mic, and you just like ran in with, tell me why you hate me, tell me why you fear me. Like really cool sort of like things to start off with. Like that's such a great starter.
Well, and I think too, like I really struggle just like with verbalizing, like just in normal language, like even what I'm thinking, like minute to minute, or like what I'm trying to say, or what I'm feeling, especially. But it does come out a lot easier in songs, and sometimes it's like really easy to just go with it, and a lot of times it's very much in the moment, like coming up with those words and like just riffing, and then at the end, after listening back, being like, oh, like okay, like now I'm kind of getting what this is about. Or-
Yeah, I also I will say, like, even with the title, for instance, like, you thought I was saying the phrase "another nightmare" while we were doing the Against the Clock, and I hadn't said any. I was just sort of gibberish sounds, just to kind of get my like melody or sort of voice thing that I want to do, just as the idea, just so it's there. And in my weird gibberish, you thought I said "another nightmare." You're like, "Thanks for the title." I was like, "Oh, I didn't even know I said that." But like, I don't think I actually said "another nightmare." I said something that sounds like that. But in the moment, you don't really know what the other person is singing. Sometimes I'll pick up little phrases, but I'm so focused and just trying to like make something as fast as possible that I'm not really paying attention to what you're singing. I'm really paying attention to how you're singing and just kind of reflecting whatever it is that you're doing. I'm kind of bouncing off of that. And so I just love that, like, I didn't actually say the title, but you always attribute it to me in the video. I think it's funny.
Well, and that's happened with like a lot of our tracks too, where there's like a moment where the way I end up realizing what the track is about is because you say something and I'm like mishearing what you're saying, but but like, another night we're like, that's what this is about. And,
Yeah.
and then like, that's where the chorus comes from. And so it ends up shaping the entire song, but it's made it easy to like figure out, I guess, what the track is supposed to be like in the moment, because I'm hearing something that you're not even saying, but it makes sense.
But
and I'm just
somehow
like,
they seem to form together. I also I will say,
and it just ends up working like so many times that way.
it really does. And we always know which ones I think are going to be something. Like, it's usually pretty obvious because certain songs will be a lot more formed than the others. And this one, I mean, immediately I was like, there is so much like meat here. And I will say, like, after we do our Against the Clocks, I sort of go away for a bit, and I have a job where I can listen to music for hours, like 6-hour shift. And so I will listen to all these Against the Clocks over and over and over. And what we'll do is I'll just sort of like have certain visions of like, I could develop this further. So I'll take it home and I will have like a list of things that I should do. And so for this one, I was like, this one already feels like it has a structure. And, we always kind of figured, I always thought this would be a perfect opener for an EP. And thankfully you agreed. And it just has like really cool energy to it. I will say, when we were finalizing the EP, there was such a rush to the end that was like this song and Old Haunts were like, we had a sort of deadline due date that we had always kind of said this will be when it comes out, because we had a show, like our very first show that we were offered. And I was like, oh yeah, that's like 3 months away. That's plenty of time to finalize these songs. But unfortunately, there were so many other things going on in our lives that like we were so rushed to get Old Haunts and Another Nightmare like finalized and sent off to, get it, out on streaming services. And so this one in particular, I was like, I would have loved at least another like 3 days to like tinker on it with the vocals and things like that. But
also this was like, I think probably off of Static, as far as like the vocal exchange going, because there was a lot happening where the first night we went in to try to record the actual vocals, we're like, yeah, it's not happening tonight.
Yeah.
And so it did take long, because it was also we had some of the other tracks that took longer to produce for different reasons. But for this one too, like being rushed and both of us having multiple other releases or projects happening at the same time.
Super busy.
And
yeah. I do think like what we kind of have realized for this specific EP is that leaning on the original vocals as much as possible is actually better, because when we tried to recreate the sort of magic of the spontaneity and like there were certain inflections that Lucia would have, and I was like, this is really cool. Like,
also you knew them so much better than me.
I knew them
so
well. I was like, no. Could you say it a little more like this? And so it became this thing where I was like trying to recreate them was kind of against what it needed. And so we really kind of ended up utilizing a lot of the original takes, or at least I did my best to kind of clean it up so it didn't sound, too rough. I don't know, like this song really benefited from having as much of the energy that we originally had.
Well, and I think that was I think we both specifically knew for this EP, like Static, most of these songs were created in those like initial like jams, or what we call against the clocks together. And that was before we had like formally decided to do a project together. Like we were kind of like just getting together, and
we were just kind of seeing what we could make.
And so I think it happened really quickly, and also just like writing that energy, and then knowing that, you know, for other EPs or albums or releases that we're gonna like feel it out what feels best. But this one, it just like keeping as much of like the in the moment stuff that we knew we really wanted to have. And
that's Another Nightmare.